All right, we're going to continue our conversation on World War II. And again, I'm going to try to tighten all of this up and not overwhelm you with too much information. I want to talk a little bit more about the domestic effect of World War II. So I ended the last lecture talking about the home front a little bit, the fact that we have all those military bases across the country, literally hundreds of thousands of men and women being called to war. You have something like almost 400,000 American women serve, a couple of million American men serve. Many of the men are drafted. Of course, all women who serve in the military of the United States are volunteers. So if you ever meet a woman veteran, recognize that she volunteered and be sure to thank her. But the reality is that in the United States, we were manufacturing most of the materials that are used in the war for the Allies, whether it's airplanes, whether it's guns, whether it's the food that they're going to eat, whether it's, no matter what it is, the materials that were used in the war by the Allies, the bombs, everything. The United States, once we were fully into this war, we were supplying all of our allies. And that includes, of course, Great Britain and the British Empire, right? Every place they're fighting, the Soviet Union and all that they're doing. China, the United States is allied with China in the fight against Japan in the Pacific. And so is supporting China in their fight. So we are supplying the world and building these airplanes, ships, tanks, trucks, all the manufacturing facilities in the United States, all the car manufacturers, everybody is turned, their businesses are completely flipped to supporting the war effort. And everybody from food manufacturers, Wrigley chewing gum, the only way they were able to get the sugar that they needed to stay afloat as a business was they gave, gum to the K rations that the soldiers were given. Um, there was rationing for everything, whether it was the silk that they used for hose for women, or if it was sugar for candy or gum or flour or meat or steel or whatever they needed. These were pretty serious efforts that the United States put forth. And we talk a lot about the American soldiers, and we should. And the fighting that was done in Europe and the Pacific, which we'll talk about pretty briefly. I teach World War II courses, and where I go through all of the battles, and I can recommend readings for you as well. But the reality is that it's the stuff that helps win the war, the American manufacturing and the American agriculture that really puts the American allies over the top in this conflict. We just, the Germans had better tanks than the Americans did. They had the best tanks in the world, and their Tiger tank was so much better than ours that it took 12 American Sherman tanks to defeat one of the German Tiger tanks. So what did we do? We built more tanks so that we could have 12 American tanks to defeat the one German tank. We just did it. It was just an amazing look at what we could do as a country when all energy was put towards something. It was just phenomenal. All sorts of different people worked in these jobs and had these new opportunities. You have Black men and women, Hispanic men and women, everybody taking these new opportunities, learning new skills across the country. There's also a group of American women called the Women Air Force Service Pilots, and that's what my book is about, my study. I put a podcast, a two-part podcast in the module for you to listen to. I've also got documentaries that you could watch about these women. I actually knew all three of the women in this picture. This is from your textbook, but I was thrilled to know that I knew all three. This woman here on the right, Elise Rohr, is still alive and is doing well. But these women, there were 1,102 of these women, and they flew for the Army Air Forces just within the continental United States. And they flew everything the Army Air Forces had. They flew everything from little Stearman biplanes to AT-6 Texans to, you know, P-51s and P-38s and B-29s, you know, the pursuit planes and the big bombers. They flew it all. And you know, served their country well. 38 of the women were killed in service to their country as well. But again, they're just one of many groups of Americans that worked towards the war effort. Now, again, there are dark sides to what the Americans did during World War II as well. And one of these great violations of civil liberties that occurred is with the internment of Japanese Americans. You know, this is something that Eleanor Roosevelt fought against. FDR was a little unsure about, but you have, because of the racism of the era, Japanese Americans had been limited in where they could live and what jobs they could have. And many of them are in California, the vast majority of the Japanese American population. And again, remember, the Japanese hadn't been able to immigrate to the United States since the 1920s, legally and, you know, at all. So most of the Japanese that were in the United States were Japanese Americans. They were born in the United States. They were citizens of the United States, but of Japanese descent. The United States made the choice to take the Japanese Americans from the West Coast to make this, you could see this line here of the portion of the United States where Japanese were excluded. Japanese Americans were excluded and not allowed to be. So if you lived in that region, which many Japanese Americans did, you were interred. I don't use the word concentration camp because I think that has such a different connotation and such a different purpose of you know, death and destruction. These internment camps were bad and a huge mistake for the United States to do. But they did build schools, and they did, you know, have doctors, and they, you know, this was a different experience than the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. But it was still definitely a, I believe, a horrible mistake that the United States made. But with this map, you can see where these Japanese Americans were interred. And again, they were behind barbed wire. And these are citizens of the United States. You can see where they are all across the country, all these different places, even in Arkansas here. And it's also important to remember that you have a lot of Japanese Americans that are in Hawaii, you know, thousands and thousands of them, and they were not interred. And that is because, you know, even though Pearl Harbor was in Hawaii, but that was because there were just too many of them. Where in the United States, you have just over 100,000 Japanese Americans. And so it's an easier group to discriminate against. The United States does not recognize this problem until the 1980s, when President Reagan made some statements of apology to the Japanese citizens that were interred. Now, you do have a number of Japanese Americans that do go on and prove their loyalty to the United States by serving in World War II, going and serving. That's a whole another story. But I didn't want to miss this. I'll have some links to some websites about the Japanese internment so you can learn more. I think I'm going to pause there, and then we'll do another video on the battles themselves, but I'll try to keep it brief. All right, thanks.